What's up, gangsters? And welcome to yet another episode of Rube Goldberg's Model Making Fundamentals series. The topic of liquid sprue, or sprue goo, as a lot of people like to call it, has come up a few times lately. And since I happen to be using some right here on a current project, I thought, it's worth making a short fundamentals video about. So, let's take a look. Okay, first of all, just in case you happen to be one of the uninitiated and you're not familiar, let me first explain what sprue goo is. It's a filler material. And basically, it's made by taking the scraps from your sprue pile and cutting them up into chunks and dissolving them in a bottle of Tamiya Extra Thin. That's the most common recipe. Now, it is true that you can use other things like MEK, methyl ethyl ketone, which is a pretty common plastics welder, Tinax, things like that, you can use as the liquid portion of your liquid sprue. But for me, it's easy when I get, about 2/3 of the way down in a bottle of Tamiya Extra Thin to add some sprue to it. And then, as I have subsequent bottles that get down to that point, I just dump them in here, add some more sprue. Now, the nice thing about it is that you can make it to whatever consistency you want, just based on how much sprue you dissolve in there. And I'll show you kind of how I like mine. I want it to be drippy, but not super drippy, so you can see. That way it's got a little bit of body, and I can use it to fill slightly larger gaps or spread out over larger areas where I want to do a blend and kind of pile it up. Now, some people have even said recently, there was a video where it was talked about that maybe instead of using your leftover sprues to make this stuff, you should use Evergreen styrene sheet because Evergreen was more pure. Now, being an engineer with some plastics background, I just felt like I should address that before anybody runs out and buys some Evergreen just for the purpose of making a bottle of this. It's not true. Polystyrene, what we call polystyrene, is, like most plastics, a blend of polymers. It's a lot like cake in that you can make cake with nothing more than eggs, flour, butter, and maybe a little water, I suppose. I don't know. I'm not a baker, but point being is you could make cake that way. It just wouldn't be much fun to eat. And so you start adding things to it, like chocolate or vanilla or whatever, to get the flavor that you want. And plastics are the exact same way. Now, polystyrene that we use in our model kits is actually what's generally known as high-impact polystyrene. And it gets its high-impact properties by being blended with other plastics like ABS or materials like butadiene. There's a bunch of different formulas, and as if you've ever built kits from different manufacturers, you know this because like Hasegawa, for example, their plastic is pretty hard and brittle. Tamiya's is kind of somewhere right in the middle, and like Airfix is really soft plastic. So how your sprue goo turns out kind of depends on what sort of sprues you use. That much is true. But Evergreen sheet is not pure polystyrene. In fact, the closest most of us come to pure polystyrene is in clear canopy parts, because in its native form, pure polystyrene is very brittle. And you can see, if you've ever cracked a canopy, why you wouldn't want to use that for all of your kit parts. But, I guess in that respect, since Evergreen sheet is really soft, it's probably like the least pure, so to speak, of polystyrene at our disposal. So I suppose from that you might decide that if you wanted a really hard sprue goo, once it cures out, that you might just use clear canopy parts. The only problem is that it might be a little hard to see. Anyway, enough of that rambling. Point is, you can make it however you want to make it to get whatever results you need. Now, let's talk about curing, because that's an issue. There's some negatives to using sprue goo, and one of them is cure time. If you use a lot of it, then it definitely can take a long time to cure. The way that I apply it, and I've got this project that I've been working on here where I can show you this to get around that problem, is number one, when I'm deciding which of my various filler materials I want to pick for a certain project or a certain issue on a project, one of the things I'm looking at is cure time, but I'm also looking at what type of material I'm applying the filler material to, whether or not I need to do any scribing or re-riveting or operations like that. And that's exactly why I chose sprue goo for this project, because I had a tremendous amount of work to do on this surface right here. I basically had to remove about 1 millimeter of thickness in material right here, because there was a huge step between this section of the fuselage and this section. And so I knew I was going to have to re-rivet all of that. And nothing rivets or scribes better than native polystyrene. So where I knew I was going to have to take care of filling the joint along the middle here and doing a little bit of blending on this area right here, I knew that sprue goo would be the best for that application. And same thing back here, where once I smooth out the work on this fuselage spine, I'm going to need to redo those rivets. So the important thing here is to notice, though, is how I've applied it. I used the brush in the Tamiya Extra Thin bottle as my applicator so that I could really control that and really get a very minimal amount of material. And because I'm doing it that way, that takes really, I would say, 6 to 8 hours before it's hardened enough that I could actually do something with it. I tend to wait until the next day just to be on the safe side, but I've never had any problems doing it that way. The other thing is that once you work this down through your sanding and polishing and scraping and whatever, 80% of it's going to be gone anyway in a case like this. So, shrinkage over time or never hardening up completely should not be an issue, and you should be just fine. So there you go. That's kind of the basics of using liquid sprue and what I think are some important points when you decide to make it part of your project strategy. Okay, there you go. A quick look at making some sprue goo and using it as a filler material. Now, I don't misunderstand that I'm saying here that sprue goo is the best filler or anything like that. There is no best filler material. There are only best filler materials for specific situations. I kind of explained why I chose to use it in this particular scenario. But other people may feel like they could have done just as good a job using super glue or even using Bondo. I prefer not to use those materials in situations like this, because with Bondo or any other lacquer-based putty, for example, they tend to be brittle. And so scribing and riveting can become a real pain in the ass with those materials. As far as super glue goes, it's hard, it's difficult to sand, and it doesn't scribe too badly, but riveting definitely not as easy as polystyrene. So again, sprue goo is just one more arrow in your arsenal of tools that you can choose from. And the nice thing is, as I showed, you can make it yourself. So anyway, I hope this was helpful and useful information. And as always, I definitely appreciate you watching. All right, guys, much love.